Thank you. We have started the recording for the WebEx session, so we'll go ahead and do a quick introduction for the record that we create. We post the recording on the website. We have what I hopefully think is the final public trust review today for the 200 Taylor Avenue North allocation project. Our project action today will be led by Adam Amrine, and we'll have introduction of commissioners in just a second. In terms of the meeting format, we have an hour and a half today until 3. So the team will provide a briefing on the proposal and specifically an update and response to the previous direction that you received from the commission. I think it was our November 17th, 2022 meeting, as well as showing us how the project has advanced to address elements of public trust. I believe that's the focus of the presentation today. We will have an opportunity for public comment. We'll make sure that we check the WebEx meeting. I'm assuming that most of the people here today are part of the project team, but if we do have members of the public, we'll have an opportunity for them to provide comment, as well as why don't we go ahead and start with introductions around the room. Valerie Keenest, the Design Commission staff, will be joining us again in a minute. We'll start with introductions of commissioners. We'll just start with the room and then go to online. Commissioners, as you introduce yourself, could you also disclose your role on the commission? And then we'll follow with staff, and then Ryan, will you be leading introductions of your team?
Yeah, or left, right.
Yeah, right. Start with Matt Alves.
Okay, my name is, I'm gonna mute.
I'm Matt Alves, Architect Commissioner.
I'm Molly Spitalnik. I'm the Get Engaged Commissioner and an Urban Designer.
Jill Creary, I'm a at-large commissioner.
Good afternoon, Adam Amrine, Urban Planning Commissioner.
And Jill is also our chair, and Adam is also our vice chair.
Haley.
Ben Gist, Architect Commissioner.
Phoebe Bogert, Landscape Architect Commissioner.
Kevin O'Neill, Transportation Planning Commissioner.
And our online commissioner, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Connor.
And your role on the commission?
I think I overlapped Pooja. Go ahead, Pooja.
Pooja Shah, the Engineer Commissioner.
Thanks.
Elizabeth Connor, Artist Commissioner.
Thanks, Elizabeth. For staff, Michael Jenkins, Valerie Keenest stepped out of the room. And then we also have, Wendy, are you on the call? No, Wendy Bandiker and Julia Acevedo are attending online. And then for the presentation team.
Yeah, so I'm Brad Rock with Biomed here, leading the efforts with the team here. We've got Perkins and Will from the architectural side. We have Berger on the landscaping side, and then Paula Hill on the legal side as well with us.
And we see Jack McCullough online. Hi, Jack.
Hello, everybody.
And Beverly Barnett from SDOT is also joining. I won't eat up too much more of your presentation time. We have you till 3, so take it away.
Okay, I may get started here. Good to see all of you again. And Kevin, welcome to the commission. Good to see you again in particular. You haven't had a chance to do this before, but those of you who have will know that I usually reserve the right to do an opening statement at the beginning of these things, but just to try to tie what we did before into what we're going to do today. And that's I want to take a couple minutes just to do that. To start off, a reminder that this is a vacation that's kind of different in kind from many others we worked on in the past, and that frankly, the applicant's not getting a lot out of it. We get kind of a small amount of additional floor area. The alley effectively is going to stay in place. It's just going to get bigger. And we're having to spend a considerable amount of money to put all the loading underground in the first level of parking to kind of overbuild that floor. So we think it's a good thing because it's just going to be a way better site and it's going to work better based, I think, on a lot of the comments we heard from you guys. I'd mentioned at the end of last meeting that this was going to be kind of a hybrid session because we've got a lot of public trust stuff to do, but the questions that you raised also, I think, are going to implicate kind of an early look at some of the public benefit items. We're going to look hard at the base case you asked us to and do a better job of comparing the base case, no vacation, to the vacation, and understand really what's the difference between the two, what's the delta in those cases. So you'll see a lot of that today. And importantly, I think we heard you about maybe putting too much weight, leaning too hard on this alley connection through the site. I mean, a lot of what we heard was really the pedestrian desire lines are going to be there will be people walking through, but they're going to be on Thomas Street. Thomas Street's going to be a wonderful green street, and it's going to be done relatively soon, right? So we went back to the drawing board and rethought this, and I think what you'll see today is we're going to still do a great job on the alley thing, and it's much better, much more well considered than you saw last time. But I think we want to shift emphasis over to Thomas too, as you guys suggested. I think that's an important move. In furtherance of that, we have had some meetings with SDOT about the Green Street plan, trying to figure out how we can fit into it. We had some initial thoughts about maybe we, in addition to doing our frontage on Thomas, that we could jump across the street and do the Seattle City Light frontage, but there's already SCL dollars that are allocated to that. So we're kind of working with SDOT trying to figure out, how can we play in this and help them sort of complete this. We don't have a presentation on that today, but we think it's going to be an important part of what we do. And so at our next meeting, we get into public benefits. Hopefully, we'll have more to say about that. You guys have obviously seen the whole Thomas Street thing. One of the great things about it is you've approved it. It's approved. It's at 100% design. So it's one of those things you can kind of step in and make a big difference. And so we're looking hard at that. The final point is you guys talked about, and we discussed walking tours at the last meeting as part of outreach. So we reached out to a bunch of groups to try to set up some walking tours here during what has been kind of a nasty winter in Seattle. And I'm here to report that we completely failed at that effort. We didn't fail at the interest in outreach. Like all the groups that we reached out to were like, look, we want to be involved. We want to do outreach. We want to do, ongoing outreach with you, but we don't want to take a walking tour. So we actually wasted some time on that in retrospect. So we don't have any walking tour results to talk to you about. And frankly, I think my suggestion to you is we're not afraid of walking tours, but we're not going to invest our time and energy into trying to force them to happen if they won't. We've contacted a bunch of additional groups. We're going to be working with them on sort of ongoing outreach on a schedule moving forward as we continue through this process. And so I think that will be, it'll be more meaningful to them, I think, and I think will be more productive in the long run. So you won't hear that today, just a little heads up. But otherwise, we look forward to completing this, hopefully this public trust phase today, and get ready to move on to the next. I'm going to hand it over to Brad. You had a couple introductory things, Brad, you wanted to offer?
Yeah, and I know you touched on it, Jack, but really just the SDOT effort that they're doing on Thomas, we're definitely looking to continuing our conversations with them and understanding their project, but also how we can integrate with them and what we can do with them, and see how that conversation goes. We're, like Jack said, we're not fully finalized our review, but we're working towards finalizing that here in the next couple of weeks, and then picking that conversation back up again with them. So that to us is a really big piece. And also just, this is our second time, but thank you guys. The feedback you gave us the first time has been really helpful as we went back and looked at this, and has added great value to what we've been doing. So we appreciate that and looking forward to kind of presenting kind of where we are today and the updates that we got based on some of the feedbacks.
Hey, Brad, I'm going to add one more thing, and that is to say I've had a conversation with my wife explaining to her again that this is what I do on my vacations, right? So I'm not going to be with you for the whole meeting here today, but I did want to say hello and kind of give you some thoughts. But Katie is here and the rest of the team, and they'll do great. So I think, Brad, Ryan is next up, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for it to connect. I could try to.
This is what I do best. My value.
I noticed one.
Well, that's.
That's interesting. Did you present, Jason?
No, it's not the password, it's not what I need, this isn't correct.
Michael, we might need more of your IT support on this.
Oh, what's going on?
Just trying to share right now and it won't let us share.
Let me in the meetings.
And he's not letting the meeting.
Okay.
We're feeling very excluded right now.
Sorry to leave you out.
Can Darrell connect?
So this is just the ISS ordinance.
You happen to have
I
your
was trying to-
presentation on
Try that one.
a drive of any kind?
I can do that before it comes to work.
Did you log into the meeting?
I am. I'm logged. Yeah, I'm on.
Because you're listed as a panelist, so you should be able
Yes.
to share.
Yeah, just saying it's.
Trying has been on since it started.
No, that hasn't affected it. I can run it for you if you want. I've got
Let me
the
try one more time because I'm on the meeting, in the meeting.
Yeah, so
I'm not seeing.
I'm not.
I'm not seeing you as a participant.
Yeah, let me try. I just exited. Sorry, I've been joined the whole time. I'm super excited. So.
I see
Okay.
Brad.
Put it back on.
There you
There
go.
Ryan, I think the share actually works for me.
Yeah.
didn't put it up.
Here. Oh, here. I think it worked, Jack.
There we go.
Spinning, spinning.
Oh, that's so exciting. And if I remember last time, there was a bit of a delay. So
Well, hopefully there won't be. But
Okay.
We'll see. Notwithstanding the network connectivity problem.
yeah.
Which is, doesn't forget when we're here.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so thanks everyone.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So we've structured this very similar to our last presentation. We're going to walk through a number of the different aspects. Where possible, we're going to try to address directly your comments or the questions you asked us so we can head those off ahead of time. This is the kind of structure you can see here for the agenda that we'll go through. We want to just kind of refamiliarize you with the development goals of that, which is broken up into these three categories: the objectives, the process, and the community engagement, of which Jack's talked a little bit about in that. So the objectives of the project were really to think about, neighborhood integration. And that was not just through this kind of mid-block connector that's running north-south, but also the edges of the site, which we heard from you, and in particular, Thomas Street, the Green Street, and the importance of that. Thinking about the pattern of the neighborhood, the historical references of that, as well as Seattle Center, which is a strong generator and one of the more kind of the aspects that draw people across this edge of the neighborhood, going east to west. Think about the emphasis on the pedestrian realm. So once again, we're going to focus not just on that mid-block connector right north-south, but also on the complete edge of the site. You had a lot of comments for us about that. Thinking about the site functionality, who's going to use it, how it's going to be used. Jason will talk a lot about the landscape design and those aspects of it. Green Street connection, which is something that we really cherish and is an important generator for the project, Thomas Street. And then the overall neighborhood fabric, how this is going to work with this, the project within that pattern. Right now we have, for our proposal, is still 2 high-rise buildings, 8 and 9 stories, tended and targeted at life science or high-tech tenants. We are proposing an alley vacation, kind of the north-south alley. And as part of that, we'll be not only dedicating that pedestrian connection, but enhancing and increasing the amount of open space on the site. So this is where we are with the timeline. With our meetings today, as you can see with the kind of blue line here, with the next series of sessions be about public benefit recommendations to council. As part of this also, we have been, as Jack talked about, trying to reach out to the community to get input with the walking tours. Been slightly unsuccessful with that, but we have a group of different community groups that we have actually started to target to reach out to get their comments, if not a walk tour in some other fashion. So as we mentioned, that's the process that we've been going through. The process to date that we've gone through to reach out and get comments from the community would include all different types, from electronic and digital to printed outreach, the project hotline, the virtual open house meetings, community conversations, of which we've had a few. We talked about that last time. But in particular, and you can see on the bottom left, which is partially obscured by our wonderful image on the lower left.
What's going on?
I'll read off for them, but we've had targeted Feet First, the Transportation Choices Coalition, Cascade Bicycle Club, Greenways, Seattle Center for Culture, Downtown Moms, and Uptown Alliance were all groups that were kind of identified and that we're seeking feedback from in this process. So we're only missing, actually, we got them all in there. I read them off anyways. And so where we're in the process, we were really hoping to begin our walking tours kind of starting about now, trying to get those set up. So we'll continue those outreach process now that it'll be kind of more directly contacting those groups and getting their feedback. I wanted to walk through with you a little bit to go through the site and its conditions. This is the orientation of the alley and its aspects. It runs north to south from John to Thomas, outletting onto Thomas Street, the Green Street. It's about 360 feet long. The block is 360 feet long by 232 feet wide, and it's an existing 16-foot alley. And the other thing to point out is we have a lot of, although when you walk out there, it doesn't feel like it, we have a lot of grade change across the site, from the high point being at the southwest corner of the site at 117.5, down to the low point, which is, not surprisingly, pointing towards the lake, which is at the northeast corner, which is a 104. So we have about 13.5-foot grade difference across the site. One of the things that you had also asked us to come back to you with is to think about what are other precedents that vacated alleys or created open space that was connected to the communities. We couldn't find exactly our project type within Seattle, but we found a couple that have bits and pieces similar to what we're trying to create. The three that we identified were shown here, and I'll go through those in a little bit more detail. So the Amazon Block 21, which is not too far from us, UW School of Medicine Phase 2 project, which we actually did, which is in the South Lake Union neighborhood, which is the north-south alley that was vacated, and the Ovation Towers, which is also another purposeful project. You also asked us to identify kind of what's around the neighborhood in terms of what's evolving, because as we talked last time, there's a lot of changes happening in the neighborhood. So these are showing you kind of in gray what's existing, and then in this kind of peach color, what are all the new developments that are coming online. Our site is in the middle in the blue. So you can see here going from kind of the upper left, we have quite a bit happening around us from new life science development kind of on the north, kind of west of our site, right on Fifth Avenue, on the northwest corner of that block, to the housing, which is under construction, which is our immediate neighbor to the west, which is number 2, working down. Number 3 and number 4 are the new developments happening on the southwest block. And you can see also this is the 9 square grid, which is kind of preserved by all the kind of new and old city kind of streets that have cut through this neighborhood. So really that's the 9 square grid we always have to analyze is actually our neighborhood that we're working in. So 3 and 4 are projects which are under process. They're kind of mid-rise residential construction, kind of anchoring that corner. Number 5, which is directly east of us, kind of the northwest corner of their block, is another kind of mid to low rise residential development. And then number 6 is a full block length, that half of the block on Thomas Street, 611 Thomas Street. So you can see there's quite a bit of variety in terms of the types of projects in this, the scale, even the length, although I would say there's a lot of projects which are trying to occupy within the kind of our immediate radius, number 2 and number 6, which are full-length developments north to south within their half of the block. Corresponding to that, so you also asked us to just kind of go through with you again how the alleys are working currently in the neighborhood. All the alleys are kind of shown here in pink, and what we did is kind of walk those alleys. The one prevailing element of all those is that they are all service alleys. You can see by the development of those other blocks. These are used for service and egress for parking garages, loading, and that they are all really kind of back of house spaces around that. Some of these don't look quite improved because the future developments aren't coming online. So immediately to the east of our block, immediately to the west, those 2 alleyways are going to be outletting on the Green Street. So we really see this as an opportunity to vacate our alley and improve, at least for our frontage, the Green Street in that location. And then obviously you can see from this pattern right above us, the alley will never continue through. That's the substation directly above us between Thomas and Harrison. And then directly to the northwest of us is the skate park and some of the other Seattle City Light utilities at that location. So there are 2 of the 3 blocks directly north of us are actually already don't have the alleys going through those. You also had asked us to kind of just walk around the neighborhood, literally, and then photograph it for you to kind of report out what we were seeing. So, we took a lot of photos here looking at points 1 and 2, kind of from our northwest corner of the site, which is an important corner for us in terms of thinking about the open space, how we place that. So one is looking west. You can see the residential building under construction, the Space Needle. We only caught the bottom third of it, but it's still there. And then looking to the north, you can see on the right, the substation, the other Seattle City Light utilities, and then the Gates Foundation in the distance. And then looking at kind of views 3 and 4, the southwest corner, which is much more tree lined. A lot of the residential development's been there for a little while. We also have the beauty of those areas of having a little bit more right of way to be able to improve both on our site, but also on the neighboring sites where they've taken advantage of that. And then looking at points 5, that's starting to look east on John Street. You can see the residential buildings kind of on the right-hand side of that, existing buildings on the left. And then point 6, where you can see also kind of the view of 6th Avenue towards the Gates Foundation, kind of the tunnel infrastructure at that point. So a lot of variety to that. That's why I wanted to show you both what's coming and what's there now. It's a pretty diverse neighborhood if you think about it, residential, science and tech, kind of Seattle Center, and Seattle City infrastructure, city infrastructure in terms of Seattle City Light and the tunnel as well. So to dive into a little bit more, our kind of 3 projects that we brought as precedents. We brought, the first was Block 21. The reason we wanted to show this is, it was interesting to us how when they vacated the alley, to kind of give back was this idea of new open space, predominantly anchoring kind of the southwest corner of the site, which reinforced 7th Avenue as an important connector. And then the way they brought that space then through and between the buildings and then outletted that is almost a Z formation. And that pattern is something that we're trying to recreate on our site. It's a little bit more elongated, and we've created, in essence, larger open spaces, kind of particularly on our northwest corner. But this idea of having the connective tissue move between the buildings and then having that share for lobbies, but also really populate with different activities and programming was something we found really interesting and inspiring as we thought through this. The second precedent project we brought was the School of Medicine Phase 2 in South Lake Union. You can see here, this is a much more compressed zone between the buildings. Partially the way we handled that was the architectural treatment, which you can see with these kind of undulating walls. And then the idea that it is a place for design and benches, which is something we hadn't proposed in our earlier proposal to you all, a place for people to stop, to enjoy the science, but also have it be a space that they can move through, making the block porous, enjoy, and make it inviting to the public in general. And then the last one was the Ovation Towers, which worked with Town Hall. And the idea that, once again, you could create space that's compressed, that people move through, that's still enjoyable between the tower and between Town Hall and the residential development on the lower right, but places also animate new open space, and that open space is welcoming. It's part of the public realm, incorporates a variety of plantings, Northwest Indigenous plantings, seating, bicycle parking, that can be this real hub of activity and also contribute to not just the project, but to the larger neighborhood. So we wanted to then quickly walk through the proposed project that we're looking at. Just to re-familiarize you with this, these are the 2 proposals that we had. The one is the no alley vacation on the left. What that worked out to be is almost essentially 4 structures within the block due to some of the peculiarities around the zoning at this location. You can see the alley connector, which is splitting the buildings here. What we had done with this is we have 2 8-story projects, achieve actually more square footage on the project with this scheme than in our proposal. And what this does is it does provide open space on Thomas Street, but the challenge is that we're also going to outlet all of our service and parking and loading exiting onto that street or potentially even entering on that street. Our proposal actually has less square footage than that scheme by about 38,000 square feet. We varied the height of the 2 buildings between 8 and 9 stories, broke up the massing, and really thought of prioritizing the pedestrian experience on the site, removing all of that service and loading from that alley, making that about pedestrians' experience. And also, one of the things that was seeing this, really thinking about prioritizing the edges of the site. So it's not just about the center, but thinking about how we're going to coordinate the exterior seating areas, little pocket seating areas around the edges of the site. They're now tied to a much more porous building here in your comments before. So we have a lot more entries, entry points, entry into tennis space, lobby, as well as public program within the building. So the things that we had looked at was the diagonal connections through the site. So you wanted to see an analysis supporting that need to move pedestrians through there. You want to see much more of a fair comparison between a no alley and alley vacation, so you could understand what the differences in the two were. And then talk a little bit when we get into the public program and public spaces, how do programs support public space within the project? So the first had to talk about this kind of diagonal connection, which we talked a lot about. And as Jack mentioned, we took a step back after the meeting, said that's still important to us, this idea of this kind of magical route from Denny Park across the site, across John Street, up between the buildings and to Seattle Center. But we also wanted to make sure we acknowledge and reinforce it's all the edges of the perimeter of the site, as well as Thomas Street being the major connective tissue between the east and west sides. And we'll show you a little bit how the designs evolved due to that, to really make it feel like it's part of the Green Street. So in thinking through this, as I mentioned, we've really started to think through the open space and the design of that's connected to it, and the edges of the site, the perimeter of the site needs to fit in with the overall pedestrian realm, the neighborhood scale, and really taking advantage of that larger right-of-way on Taylor and 6th Avenue to really emphasize that. And then the kind of give back or the tie-in is Thomas Street and John Street. That's where we're carving open space. Those are areas where we have much more compressed area in terms of where we can build the building to the lot line at that point, so that we can create, in many ways, a much more generous buffer of landscape and open space around the entire site. And reinforce, once again, Thomas Street as the major connection. Hearing from you all, that's where the major crossings are. That's where pedestrians are going to flow from South Lake Union into this neighborhood and across to Seattle Center. So with that in mind, we took a close look at the traffic analysis around the site and looked at this. So from the no vacation traffic patterns, you can see that the challenge really becomes that we're starting to really use Thomas and John Street as our entry points for loading and service access into that mid-block portion. And even more disturbing, imagining the volume of traffic that can potentially exit onto Thomas Street. With our proposal, as you can see, once we take that down, we only have one point of egress, which is similar to what we discussed last time. Here at the kind of southwest building, on the kind of southeast corner of that, is where we're putting all our loading and all our servicing, and all our cars are going to ingress for both buildings into that one site, which allows us to remove all the traffic that would be outletting into Thomas, and also kind of move this into kind of the mid-block on that south side. So this is showing kind of just the traffic counts as we've started to look at that, the difference between the no alley vacation on the left and the alley vacation on the right. And you can see the amount, how the traffic is all funneled on our proposal on the right-hand side into that one point of ingress, also away from the kind of public space. And when we talk about pathway through the mid-block connector, you'll see we're moving pedestrians towards the southeast corner of the site, the way they'll enter that open space, which also ties better into the overall grid of the city and the way the buildings are there, and then into that mid-block connector. For the two, also showing how, as Jack had mentioned earlier, this has to be about all the edges of the site. If we think about it on the no alley vacation, people will be circulating east to west along Thomas and John, but be intersecting at the alley with the vehicle and loading traffic. Our proposal allows all edges of the site, which includes the middle of the site, to be occupied by pedestrians, not just circulating along the north and south edges, but through that mid-block. And we're also hopeful that it will also really energize Taylor and 6th, to your comments. As we go through the architectural plans, you'll see much more porosity and identification of entryways and entry points into that. So what it comes to is that on the left, we really are going to be treating the alley as a service zone that interrupts the Green Street and interrupts the new open space that we proposed from that, versus on the right, where the open space can be preserved, connected to the Green Street, reinforcing that east-west connection, and really reprioritizing that space from being about service and loading to the public realm and giving back to the community. The other thing was talking about that connection through and what kind of program would support it. So these are kind of two different elevations of that. What you see is we continue the kind of arch language of Seattle Center and one of the metaphors we brought here. But looking from at the top elevation from left to right, we have an entryway which is framed by the arched glass, which has a look into the cafe that we're going to be providing in the project. The center space, which is, we thought of this experience, which would be quite beautiful, is perforated metal with the fitness center behind that'll change. It'll be a piece of almost like art in that space, but this idea of this experience as you move through it. And on the right-hand side is this new arcade space, which is a semi-public program, seen as kind of a meeting space, would have food, and that's tied to the southeast kind of entry space and plaza space that we're designing in that kind of parklet. Across from that, you'll see kind of going from kind of right to left, you have the ability for that to have a kind of green wall, which will be a part of this kind of experience. So we're actually taking the vegetation, wrapping that up onto the building, and that also will cue and move people more towards the diagonal to the southeast corner away from the loading entry. We have a corresponding entry point into the bike area, which also has a perforated metal pattern on that. So it has really interesting texture. We want to also really reinforce commuters and the biking commuters to have a welcoming entry. And then we have our kind of lobby entry, and that is split with also bicycle storage in that area and kind of the bike area, so that we want to once again celebrate the commuters who are arriving here. You'd also asked us to kind of quickly walk through a day in the life of how people would experience it. We have these great names. So this is the early bird who's arriving here. It could be the early bird coming to work here, or the early birds waking up in their condos or apartments across the street, want to grab a cup of coffee. They could come to this building, as you can see here in yellow on the left, and they could hang out depending on time of year, how sunny it is, how hot it is. They could hang out on this new perch, which is the rendering kind of in the middle and on the left-hand side, right on Thomas Street, kind of at this location, looking on the new Green Street, kind of that beautiful area, getting some early morning light. Maybe if they're a little less Italian, want to have like an afternoon cappuccino, they could sit kind of then on that kind of mid-block connector, which is here. So they're really using that lobby space as that kind of new coffee shop and existing on both edges. And then also the people working with the building could decide to hit the fitness area. You can see in pink here. So as you can see on the rendering on the upper right, really creating and animating that kind of new perforated metal, that new kind of experience that we're creating within that. About noontime, what we've been thinking of is that, it really gets the chance for the community and the people within the building to mix and mingle and use these two new public spaces created. The southeast corner, where we've now looked at it from a solar aspect, we get a lot of sun in that area. We've reduced some of the trees and plantings so we can really have that be the sunny spot on cooler days, on our shoulder seasons. That's tied to the blue area, which is the arcade you can see in plan, which is that semi-public spot where they have drinks, hang out, meeting space. And then on really hot days, you could maybe decide to sit on the kind of northwest plaza. You can see in pink, right adjacent to the Green Street. We also have the laybys kind of directly on the west. You remember we had this suggestion that maybe the food trucks pull into the plaza. We had a lot of hardscapers suggesting we keep them out, so that's a people space. It doesn't confuse traffic in that area. But that still is a place where we could pull the food trucks into the curb line there and have that animate the space. And on a hot day, it might be nice to be in a little bit of shade. And then as we start to get into kind of the remote worker, the work-life balance, that we're trying to embed within this a whole mixture of different activities, but also activities that will be used by the community throughout the day, different seating, different kind of spaces, the coffee shop, the arcade, the different plazas, so that once again, as people return to work, they have a nice healthy balance of indoor-outdoor experience as well as amenities to draw them and also connect to the larger community. Little less fun, but going through this is just the amount of open space. For the no alley vacation, you can see here the proposal split by the alley. So we have a little bit over 12,000 square feet proposed within the project. And then you can see here, what we have here is we've doubled the amount of open space that would be counted towards that. And we've also been more judicious about activating not just one edge of the site, but both corners, southeast and the northwest. So comparing those two here, you can see that we're providing almost 23,000 in our proposal of open space versus 12,500. And because of that, one of the challenges I mentioned was that 13.5 feet of grade drop. What would happen with that is that even though this is shown at 2.6% slope down the alley, most people would circulate along the edges of the site. We wanted to make sure that all zones around the site are completely accessible and easy to traverse. So we're really thinking this mid-block connector will be an easy way to move through the edges of the site and also make it fully accessible.
Since I can't get into the meeting, can I advance slides with you?
Yeah, sure. Good luck with it.
It's the mysteries of WebEx.
Yeah. We know the filter. We know what's going on.
Okay, so cool. Thanks for having us back, everybody. One of the things that you asked us to do is take a little bit deeper dive, look into what was required by Streets Illustrated along the right of ways. So really what we did is kind of go through and show comparison sections between what's in Streets Illustrated and what the required would be versus what we're proposing for each of the streets. Thomas Street, in our little hypothetical in terms of the baseline condition or no alley vacation, we decided to locate the open space there since that's logically where you would do it, given that it is a green street, so it is probably the most similar in some ways. It is, however, embellished with trying to provide additional seating opportunities, so dimensionally it looks similar, but we think that there are more opportunities in terms of paving and amenity. And as Brian said, we have a coffee shop also spilling out onto this space as well. You'll notice in this and the other, as we get through the landscape too, that we've provided additional seating opportunities. I think really the diagram before was two open spaces with this sort of connecting tissue through the connector, but this kind of blurs that line. So looking at, 6th Avenue, this is probably one of the more pronounced areas, and this is an area where we are thinking there's more lobby entry, a little bit wider. We have these kind of like parklet little spaces where we're really trying to provide amenity in there. So you can see, 8-foot sidewalk, 6 feet of planting. We've got not only a setback from between the sidewalk and the building, but we've also got another 13 feet of a planting amenity and 4 feet of walk-off by removing some of the angle parking and providing parallel parking. Taylor Avenue, again, another one that's challenging. Just this allows us to go from a standard 8-foot sidewalk, 6-foot planting to a much more robust, I think, cross-section across there, which is opportunity, again, for seating. We're also looking at providing ample amounts of planting, I think, which is incredibly important from an ecology perspective. We are trying to promote a mix of indigenous as well as well-adapted vegetation as we go around each of the streets, but also trying to develop a unique character for each street. So each of these programmatically has its own flavor, and each one I think can be ample in terms of the amount of program it supports. The John Street facade is the Sunny Terrace. So we did take a few trees out of there. I think dimensionally it's also very dramatic. The amount of open space that we're able to provide. I think this is a great venue for if you were doing a block party or something like that. In addition to having the green street, this one is a really nice place to linger, to hang out. That seating edge kind of outward facing too. I think last time we came to you, we had that edge a little closer to the property line. So it was more like sidewalk, here's the property line. This makes it a little bit more inviting for the public by pulling that seat wall back a little bit. So that it really is a good opportunity to linger. As Ryan mentioned, you can pull a food truck up in there and the parking stalls adjacent to the space during the summer, and that's a great space to eat lunch and hang out and stuff. We do have a big shade tree too. Again, I think it kind of fits to that, having these more opportunities for seating and other things that can be, utilizing this, whether you're in the building or whether you're just walking your dog through the neighborhood or you're just out and about. So the other thing that we talked about as far as what you wanted to see was a little bit of how it's using spaces. So through the studies and development of the design, looking at a few things. So you can see the site plan that we presented last time we were here in the upper right. Down in the lower middle of the screen, looking at a little bit more continuity through the ground plane textures, more seating opportunities through the interstitial space between the buildings and the two plaza spaces. Integration of seating both in the North Plaza and South Plaza, peeling those edges back as I described in the sections to really allow for that opportunity to have both inward and outward facing opportunities for people who are using it through the neighborhood. and really make them a little bit more flexible in terms of the way that they're being used. So, we're really also trying to invite people in. I think we heard loud and clear that, it was like, what's going to make me think that I'm able to go into this space, and it's not just for the building. So having visual cues to that ties into the ground plane paving, having those seating opportunities, seeing activity that are people out walking their dogs, hanging out in the sun, as well as the building occupants. So you can also see a little bit more visibility in these renderings as we go through of what's going on in the interior of the building. So there's a much better marriage of activity interior to exterior with the neighborhood. Part of it too, and Ryan will go into this a little bit more too, but refinement of the arches. Those apertures allowed us to have a little bit more visibility through those spaces. The other thing is just refinement of the ground plane materials, planting, edges, how it hits the building. This is even just evolution of the design process gives you a much better visual on what these spaces are going to look and feel like. There's a higher degree of transparency and a higher degree of lighting. So having those amenities, through that space, I think will also make it seem more inviting and enticing, as well as safe. I think that we heard that loud and clear too. There's dedicated public seating, as I said before, having it both, outwardly facing and inwardly facing, and lots of opportunities, lots of material changes, whether it's precast or wood. So depending upon the temperature, time of day, season, there's always going to be spots for people who aren't going to want to sit. Giving a little bit more of a delineation between, what seems public and what seems private, particularly on this northern terrace. As you can see in the upper image, it's a little bit just more open-ended, and again, pulled that food truck out of there, so that would just stay in right away, but not inviting vehicles into this space, but also creating the framework for stuff to happen, allowing those opportunities and really making it feel inviting.
Yeah, so so just to kind of show you what allows that to happen, this is the No Alley Vacation ground plane. You can see the open space on Thomas Street where we have two of our lobby entries indicated with the kind of pink arrows. And then the two buildings on the southeast corner of the block, upper right and lower right, you can see those kind of entries off of the street. And then really to focus on is the two large parking entries off of John Street on the right-hand side, and then the 4 loading berths that would be required. And it started to become a question of like, all edges of this site are occupied primarily by service, two sides by service or parking entries. And then you can see in our proposal, we've actually post-shaded these walls intentionally with the kind of dark tones. So you can see the amount of glass we're providing at the lower level in terms of the visibility. Some of the changes are, see by the number of now, more pink arrows on this is the number of entry points into the building, velocity that we heard from you last time that was a concern. So we have our kind of lobby, kind of coffee, flower shop, different uses, access through the lobby spaces, not only having entry points on the Northwest Plaza, but also entries off of Taylor and 6th Avenue. So the buildings have more entry points or more porous on those long street edges. And you can also see how Jason's kind of choreographed new open seating areas, like right off of Taylor, off of that lobby entry, which corresponds to the mass he moves up above in the building. And then at the corner where we have the ability to really energize Thomas Street, we not only have that seating area that spills out, but we also have an entry point on that northeast corner. You can also see from this the kind of way we were encouraging the bicyclists and the people commuting, even people from the neighborhood, to be able to cut through this space. But there's the large bike storage, bike showers, kind of mini kind of bike shop in there for them to work on their bikes and tune them in that zone across from the fitness. See the cafe indicated there. And then the arcade space, which has a lot of frontage under that arch component that spills out and connects to it. And you can see the green wall, that beautiful kind of planting buffer that Chase's design is really moving pedestrians away from the one loading parking entry we have on the site.
I think working collaboratively, it's allowed us to take that interior program, imagine what could be going on outside. And so having these adjustments, having the porosity of the building really helps the evolution of the landscape design. But I also think it helps, create kind of a vision for what this is going to be.
And you'd also asked us about the drop-off zones last time, so the drop-off zone you can see on the east side of Sixth Avenue corresponds to the tenant entry and the arcade entry. So the arcade has two entries, one off the public space in the plaza we're creating on the kind of west side, but also on the east side has a formal front door, once again encouraging and activating Sixth Avenue. And then another drop-off zone directly opposite the tenant kind of conferencing area that could work with our kind of westerly entry. And part of this is, trying to really think about when we drew up the kind of no alley vacation, the way pedestrians would circulate around the site, which is, the major connective tissue, as Jack started in his preamble, about Thomas Street being the most important edge to kind of move people east-west across the site. We'd be funneling them in, but to only two of our lobby entries to those points. And then we'd have to use the other edges of the site for people to circulate around versus the ability you can see here. We got a little enthusiastic with the arrows and the porosity. The major red ones are the entry points. The lighter ones are visibility into program. But regardless, the idea that people can navigate and move through the entire site, not just the people who use this building, but the public moving to different destinations, their own homes or businesses adjacent to us.
So as I mentioned, it's a.
I'll be your clicker.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we really promoted this as two different spaces, and I think this really kind of highlights that point. Different solar exposures, different environments, starting to develop their own material stories, but also having that uniformity to invite people in on the ground plane by material and texture. So we really do think these two distinct spaces, as well as encouraging people to linger in that connecting piece between the two. Added benches also show more consistency in paving, planting, little spots of green, the green wall that Ryan mentioned. All these little things will give us cues that invite people in, as well as sort of connecting it to help make that connection that you saw in the diagram. So these are just a few of the views kind of looking at those spaces. 1 and 2 are looking at that southern exposure. You can see a little bit of the the singular tree, but having that sort of civic quality with that peeled back seating opportunity there, as well as trying to invite people into the connecting space. 3 and 4 show the northern plaza, and then looking into that connecting piece. And again, showing a variety of materials. Some play with a little bit of what's going on the building with the precast benches, but also offering wood and other things as material options. A little richer ground plane in terms of texture and color, I think, is also a good cue to invite people in off of the right of way. Again, those arches opening up allows a lot more light through, and so we can start to see like this actually does feel like a safe, inviting space to want to go into.
And then kind of looking at the elevations, quite a dramatic departure. What would happen in the no alley vacations? That space is really turned into the servicing and loading. And due to the grade, they would actually be staggered down the massing, as you can see here with the 4 different loading points. That really pushes people out from that center and potentially even would jeopardize, the lobby and the entry points and even that plaza, the connection to the Green Street. So these are the most fun renderings our team did on the project. You can see the kind of blocking mass, the way we opened up to Thomas Street, but really as you start to look between the buildings, it's about service and loading in that zone. As opposed to that, as I mentioned before, having these edges be porous, so we're actually cutting away the corners of the building so you can move under and through those, and those have beautiful views of the arcade space, which is that public program, or to the bike area. And that this area, as Jason was talking about, has the same kind of texture in terms of the treatment of the ground plane, the pavement through that space to really give a cue to people entering the site in the southeast corner of the remote edges, the northwest, to move through this, but also have these respite areas, the nursing log seating areas, cafe seating, and these benches and these kind of playful crescent shapes that move throughout there so that people could sit, linger, see activity, grab a coffee, hang out.
There's better integration too between like the arcade or the coffee shop on what's happening interior to exterior, as well as that green integration. So I know it's a little hard to see in that one, and you can see in some of the renderings, but you can see some of the vegetation kind of poking up through this grading, and we're trying to deal with a little more of the details that I think that are going to make this place special, as well as trying to make it more inviting, enticing, make people want to go explore it. So that's where we are at in the design, but I think it's all contributing to making this a more inviting space. So we talked a little bit about plant palette before, and again, I think trying to get character to what each of these spaces are. This one's a little bit more meadow-like. You get the green wall on the left-hand side. You have this big giant shade tree on the right-hand side, and this little green space with plenty of seating set back from the right-of-way. So again, it's not a hard edge out to the property line, inviting people into this space with the building as the background, and you can see the open air view all the way back to the trees that are located on the North Plaza. Again, I think that it is trying to also do a little bit of something special in terms of mixing grasses, native perennials, a well-adapted plant material, having it be fun, and this one be a little bit more of a summer plaza. So going to the North Plaza, looking at this aperture, I think was one of the things that we were looking at is like, am I going to feel safe in there? And I think that we're trying to balance this idea of lightness, having these wider apertures, introduce lighting. You can see a little bit more of the character of the planting. Introduce the seating before, so it's not just a pass-through space, so it actually does seem like someplace you'd want to linger. This is right outside of the bike room, so you can imagine somebody putting on their bike shoes, picking up their bike. There's a little bike shop there, and then the coffee shop is kind of back behind where those trees are. This one's a little bit more, I should say too, a little bit more like forest floor, little, again, native understory. Sorry, Ryan.
That's okay.
So this is actually some of that covered space, which again is kind of a little bit of a microclimate in that it is covered space. So it actually does become a great place to spill out of the arcade. It's also a place, if it's raining, I could stop and linger there, check my phone, do something that you couldn't do in these other open spaces. So this was integration of more seating opportunity through this as you journey through the connected space. This just showed, that illustration between what's going on in the interior as far as the program goes. So this shows the bike storage, public cafe, and arcade spaces, which I think all have direct connections to what's going on in the exterior that we're relating back to, as well as transparency from people just walking through the space or even walking by the space. It's very legible what's going on. And then there's a response in the landscape for each of these items as well.
So what we've tried to do with this is kind of have three kind of highlights in terms of the proposal. One is the idea about access and circulation, so that we're maximizing circulation not just around the buildings, but through the entire site for the community, providing that through block connection, but also emphasizing that the edges of the site are really important. So you can see that we've made those more porous and focused on those edges. We've consolidated all the vehicular activity into one point, one node off of John Street, and separated that from the public entries and from the public space and the way the public will actually move through the open space on the site. And really thought about enhancing, as Jack started off with this preamble, this connection to Thomas Street and to that east-west corridor. Open space, providing the kind of large open space in the southeast and the northwest, and really thinking about placemaking and how that knits into the community. And then it is about creating, giving a little more space around the buildings for the community and for the development. So there is access to air, light, and views, not only from the building, but through the building, under the building, and into the development for the community.
So, I think that a lot of, what we focused on today was not only examining the right-of-way, but as Ryan said, placemaking. So it's getting into the details of what the proposal entails, what are the things that are going to accomplish the goals, both in terms of the ground plan materiality, programming of the building, all these things that are going to make this place, what special and what it is, as well as how is it going to fit into the neighborhood context. So, I think that we've been working since the last time we saw you pretty diligently on trying to do these collaborations to make sure that we're accomplishing all these things. And, I think that it's good evolution. We're still in the process of design work, but I think that we've come a long way since the last time we presented to you. Thank you.
Great.
I've looked a couple of times. We have to see if there are any for the public. We do have a couple of people that have joined us. If you are a member of the public and you can hear us and you want to make up to 2 minutes of public comment, I'll look for a hand raised. And in the chat function. Otherwise, I reached out to Joe Hurley, who's here with STC. I don't think you have any comments.
No, I don't.
Great, thank you. I know that Beverly Barnett was with us for a bit. Beverly, if you're still on the call, were there any comments that you had before we move to commissioner questions? We'll come back to Beverly in a little bit. Joe, why don't we start with, in terms of commissioner questions, we can start with the commissioners online with Elizabeth and then Pooja, and then we can maybe start here on the left with Kevin and walk around the room. Elizabeth, if you're ready, did you have any questions?
I do, thanks. Thanks very much for this. It was really great to see the details. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, great. You talked about Thomas being a lot of emphasis on Thomas, but you also talked about John. It seems to me that if not equivalent, you're also looking at both of those streets in interesting ways. Is that correct?
We are.
And I think that was part of the wanting to start to define what's the different character between the two spaces. Obviously, the exposure is different, north versus south, but also there's some programmatic differences between what's going on in the building, and with like the cafe as an example of using that spill out space, that seems more appropriate for the Thomas Street, Green Street, as well as just the character of the neighborhood. And so the southern plaza is a little bit more civic, a little bit more open, less vegetation, more paving. So those were some decisions that were made that are specifically responding to those two street characters.
Great. I think I was the person who suggested walking tours last time we met, and so I appreciate you keeping that in mind as the weather gets better. I also am hoping that you'll be walking about yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like you are.
Yes.
I was interested in the photographs you took, alleys in particular, and the surroundings. I didn't see any people. Is that actually accurate, that you don't encounter people walking as you're looking?
Yeah, not so much. It's also the weather hasn't been great, although we did find mostly a sunny day when we were out there. I think it really is, and I'm just going to bring that photo up because you had mentioned that. I think the challenge is, that's the edges of the site. That's that piece. Alleys here. I think it's a challenge, Elizabeth, because of the nature of those alley spaces. They are service related. They're blank. You can see in the photos here, they have lots of doors, no windows, no activity, no programs. So we didn't stage this by shooing the people out. This was the real life condition. And I think it comes from, it's also a neighborhood that's going through a lot of construction activity. So that sort of discourages some more movement. I will say that honestly, after spending time on site, including our own site where we've done a little bit of work on that, what we really found is that people exist on the edges of the major block. Taylor 6 is a way that people migrate more south, and then a lot of people are moving along Thomas Street. That's when we're out there. Not many people are walking once again through these alleys because it's not a shortcut to get anywhere. You're not going to shortcut through an alley to get to Denny.
No.
And you're not going to shortcut, through some of these other spaces that are less friendly to get to because there aren't a lot of draws to get you there.
At least the street grid is open, so walking through this neighborhood for a long time. I mean, in this particular space right now, and since we've been working on this project, I've walked through this repeatedly, and just to see it at different times, especially during the pandemic, as things were changing. So I do think that there is a point, with lower traffic volumes and things farther north, that is a more hospitable route, we'll say.
It is funny. I just want to point out this. I'm looking at this photo. There are no people either. So it is pretty quiet because partially due, reinforce that, all the construction activity happening. There's so much happening that a lot of people, there's not a lot of people there. And the people who are there are, in the apartment buildings or whatever, are migrating out of that neighborhood earlier in the morning. So.
Thanks. You talked about transparency. In what cases is the transparency in two directions? How much can people going through this newly constituted quote alley space?
Sure.
What will they see happening?
Sure, I can go back to that.
And in addition to that, what spaces will the general public be able to enter and
Sure.
when?
Thank goodness. Jason, do you want to talk about like I'll zoom in onto this a little bit.
Yeah, so as far as like walking through and what you're seeing going on in the interior of the space, I think the arcade is definitely a piece of it. Fitness, obviously there'll be a lot of activity. There's glazing, the bike storage, as Ryan said, there's a perforated screen. So you're seeing activity as well as actual glazing. And then obviously the coffee flower shop lobby area that has physical spill out space to the North Plaza connector piece. As you're walking on the outside of the building, not through the core, again, I think that there's more transparency, there's more entrance, there's more porosity to the building as a whole. So you can see those arrows on both the east and west sides. I think the south side is mostly focused on the arcade and the plaza. We do have a single loading entrance, but it makes sense to have that on John Street. Thomas Street is definitely the most active as far as what's the interaction between building program and what's going on with the site.
And in terms of like public access, we've thought about the arcade being this public space, maybe reserved by the tenants at certain opportunities, but really a place to get food and drink. We're still programming exactly how that's going to work. Meeting space that could also use and spill out. People move back and forth between the new open space. And then the lobby space is having coffee, flower shop, other types of public program within that. So we're trying to really bookend the two ends of the aperture with a program that allows that to be energized. And part of the thing that we're going through to curate it so we don't have three coffee shops is this idea that they will have some difference in the program, so there will be reason to move back and forth across the site, not just for the people using the buildings, but the public in general.
And it's a subtle difference, but I think part of it is time of day too. And that was the whole reason for the day in the life of, we understand that different people using the site are going to be occupying and activating at different times of the day. So there are things going on not only on the weekends with having this kind of formal seating. You can imagine walking a dog on Thomas Street. There are other things going on in terms of just daily routines as well. And they both can happen concurrently. You can have people actively working in the office building and it still feels okay to sit in that plaza, either both north or south.
The last thing would be people are going to be accessing from the garage, coming up through the lobbies so that they can have public access through there. So the lobbies aren't meant to feel blocked and locked down. They're going to have program in it and movement through them.
So could I, as a general member of the public park down there?
Yes.
Okay. And what hours? What happens in the evening? How during what hours would there be activity in the building, and what happens after people go home?
Before you answer that, quick time check. We're at 2:30. We need to get through all of our questions, deliberation, and our action by 3 o'clock. So I'll just encourage commissioners and the team to keep your questions and answers as brief as possible.
And that was my last question, so a quick answer would be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the hours of the building, from a business standpoint are typical. I think with regards to the public use and how that's activated, it really depends on how the public responds to the spaces and how they utilize it. The arcade can be in the evening and after hours. You're close enough to, the Kraken space and having that activated at different hours. So again, program around us is also going to dictate some of our hours as we utilize the space. So I wouldn't say I have a set time frame. It's more how the space gets utilized and activated and how people are using it. We'll start to kind of define our hours.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to pass it along to Pooja.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think you kind of answered this one, but I think you described the arcade space as a semi-public space. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, I think, the thought is it's a public space, but it does want to be reservable at times. So because it's going to have meeting spaces and other components. So because it's a large space, it's designed so that if one of the tenants up inside the building want to have a team building event or something, they could reserve it. So that's what we mean. That's going to be reservable. It's not like other restaurants or other cafes where certain times holiday parties or something could occupy it.
Okay, thank you. And then thinking about public benefit, for stormwater management for this site, is there a requirement for the city that you extend the public storm main to this? I think there's a public storm main about a block away.
Not sure about that one.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. For those that can't see me. That's something we'll have to check with civil on. And as far as I understand, I don't think that we have been required to extend that, but
That's my understanding, but I'd have to come back.
Yeah. we need to confirm with civil.
Thank you. Pass it back to the room.
Thanks, Pooja. I think we'll start with Kevin and work this way.
So thanks for the presentation. Just a couple questions. One, in terms of consolidated access for loading and parking onto John, any concerns raised so far with either functionally or aesthetically what that access garage entrance point is going to look like or feel like?
I think from aesthetics, no. We've tied that into a number of things. We try to size the aperture so it works well with the view angles, because I know that's one of the concerns that'll be at the recommendation meeting, and to kind of work through that. So we feel like it's in the right spot in the long blank wall that we would have, that we've shielded that with the green wall at that location. So.
And then my second question is in terms of that circulation drawing you had, are you showing, just to clarify, biking through the site as well as to the site?
We want to allow bikers to go into that space to access the bike storage in their bike area for that.
There's the bike shop and there's the.
Right, I understand that. It seemed to be showing a bike route through that alley site. At least
It was more just the fact that that's the point of
Those are
entrance.
the- okay.
So you
Right.
come off of Thomas where you
Yeah.
have the Green Street and the bike lane's already going in
Right,
there.
okay.
And then that'd be your access, or if you're coming from downtown, you could also access.
You
from
can
that
also
side.
access from John,
You
but
can
you're
either,
not
get off your
encouraging,
bike and walk into the spaces and or.
but you're not encouraging bike
No.
access through the site.
And I think part of that's helped by on Thomas Street, that bike lane, I believe, is on the north side.
It is.
So it's not going to be a natural inclination to take a right and bike through.
Right,
this.
okay. All right, thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
sorry I didn't get to meet you guys in the beginning. I'm Erica. I just had a quick question. It seemed from the context diagrams that you have quite a bit of residential population on John Street and will be on 6th Avenue. And I'm just curious if when you were thinking about the access to the retail environments, what your thoughts are about the visibility for those residents and sort of the rationale to pull all of the retail onto Thomas. I understand the Green Street, but the fact that you have this large user group adjacent to your sunny space, and why not have more retail adjacent to that plaza?
You mean on the southeast corner? Yeah, I think that's why, like in this incredibly small view, but the arcade space, which is here, is actually the whole south half of that building, and that is that space to invite the public into that. So we really see that as kind of the anchor for the whole development on that piece. And that is based to the majority of the residential buildings kind of on the southeast corner, as well as still visible and access to the southwest where the other communities are in that location.
And would that be a shared, what is sort of the program of that arcade?
We're still working it through.
Okay.
From a vision level, it'd be like, it could be activated in the morning for like coffee,
Yeah.
breakfast spaces, turn to a lunch space, and then in the afternoons, probably like early happy hour drinks. And we don't see it going much past that, but then it
Food.
can also be
Food.
flipped
Yeah.
around to,
Yeah.
exactly.
Food and drinks.
Food and drinks. And then, it can be flipped into meeting space, large team building events. And so it's kind of got a multiple flexible space, but it is food and beverage based around that, just knowing that activates it really nicely. And the tenants are also typically people who live in the neighborhood, and they enjoy that, having that easy transition back into and from work. So
Originally, we had something shadier with like arcade games.
yeah.
Really bringing back the fun, what's the fun center from?
Likewise, that the food truck discussion, I do think that's an opportunity to bring in retail, but not necessarily have it programmatically built into that. As you know, retail's probably kind of struggled. So trying to be a little more creative on how this needs to be used.
I think I just have one question, and it's really based on a little bit more explanation on the wayfinding through the site. So I think you've done a really great job of kind of articulating and talking about how the open spaces complement Thomas and John and the differentiation. But even just when you flip through the renders, I still found it pretty challenging to see how you would be drawn through the site and know that you can move through. And so what are those wayfinding cues, whether, on the ground plane in architecture?
Well, on ground plane one, pulling back some of those edges just so it's more open. So even just widening out the aperture so there's physically more space and making visibility easier. Removing some vegetation and actually making that more intuitive. Ground plane materiality, so having a contrasting color and trying to draw people in with that. I think that lighting, introducing more lighting throughout, more seating opportunity, so it's connected. So you can see people, there's no blank spot as far as you're gonna see more people lingering, hanging out, which is going to help, I think, attract you through. And I think the arches, we've mentioned, in terms of the architecture, that is probably the single biggest move. Just trying to increase the amount of visibility, allowing for, those cues that are going to draw people in, as well as the program and spill out and other things.
Yeah, so we're gonna be probably uplighting those arches, and the only two arches you can actually move through are at the corners of the site, which act as a gateway element as you go through that.
A terrific project. Beautiful. I guess I have a question on the bike storage and the fitness. Are those open to the public or are those just for the building?
Right now, it's tenant amenity space.
And then I think you mentioned that you have a perforated screen. I guess I've seen those bike rooms can get kind of junky looking.
Yeah. We have
sometimes.
Yeah, we have two halves to the bike room. We're gonna try to keep the junky parts on the one side,
Okay.
behind the perf, and
My
then
mic goes in the back.
yeah, they'll be curated. But then on the other side, it's floor to ceiling glass. So it is true. There are like some of these elements aren't so great.
And then I just had one quick question that might be on there. How wide, so as the pass through between the buildings goes through the narrow part there, how wide is that? Is that the actual alley right of way?
No, we've still made that wider. I believe we're at 20 feet at that location. But what we've done is, we have a great diagram in here somewhere with the dimensions. We've tried to really, as you can see here, minimize where that 20 feet's experience of where the cursor moves super slow between that edge of the arcade and here, which I think is about 54, 60 feet. So it's about, it's almost a fifth of the whole block is where you have that compression.
Okay.
So part of the goal was to really have as much outlet visually and physically to move out of that space.
I had a question on slide 36. Back there, you probably need new glasses is the answer, but actually, so it wasn't slide 36. There was one where you showed the slopes of the
Oh,
surrounding
sure,
streets.
35.
35, okay. Is the slope on John Street, is it 12%? I just can't read it.
No, it's 1.2%.
1.2%, got it.
That would have been exciting if it was 12.
Yeah, I was trying to understand if this was contributing to an accessible route. Okay. Great. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, that's great, leave that up later.
Yeah.
All right, pass.
The only question I have is when you went out walking.
Yeah.
How hard is it to get across 7th on John? Because we talked about that last time.
It is.
That just not gonna be a great way to get to the park because that is such a tough intersection. So did you try it? And
We did.
It's lived.
We lived. It's signalized, right? Because the last time we had a debate whether it was signalized or, so I went there right afterwards and was like, it was signalized. It's not as pleasant as Thomas Street for sure, and to walk across the edge. It's possible.
Right.
It's possible.
Harrison's okay right now.
Yeah.
Thomas, as part of the Green Street, is gonna get improved.
It will.
And then there's John hanging out.
Yeah.
And I appreciate Erica talking about the residences nearby, but I truly wonder if that isn't gonna end up being a barrier for some of the desire lines. So that's why I wanted to ask if you tried it.
Yeah, we've done it a couple of times. And it is, I think it's also, you also wonder if with the density of people arriving at the site, it will help to make it feel safer, right? Because right now, pointed out by our photos, right? There's not many people there. More people, more activities, I think will create more cautious drivers and more welcoming.
You just got a lot of marbles there on,
Yeah, we do.
Time of day matters a lot. Yeah. I think that does have a big impact on how easy it is to do that, how that student group through there. Yeah, it is because that is signals you can do it. Obviously, is if you're gonna find the path that you like. This also gives us options, so we definitely have that diagram, but we also realize that everybody's going to choose their own adventure as far as what that is. I do think Thomas will be successful long-term for the city.
thanks.
Great, thank you for your presentation. Others have already asked the questions that I had listed, so I'll pass it on to Matt.
I don't have any questions, some comments, so I can skip my question part.
Thank you. Before we transition to deliberation, and Adam will walk us through that in the action. Beverly's back on. Beverly, did you have a quick comment before the commissioners transition to deliberation?
Yeah, thank you. I know, are you hearing me? I'm hearing feedback.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, thank you. Super quick, I would like to note that this feels very responsive and like a really serious body of work. I have a much better understanding of the pedestrian environment and how I might use and engage with the site. I do want to add the SDOT note of caution about SPU and truck and move in, move out, and be careful with the dimensions and working with the SIP group on that. But really thoughtful work. Thank you.
And Beverly, they will continue to, just for commissioners and for their benefit, they're continuing to where they, being the project team, is continuing to work with SDOT and with you to refine the SIP, to look at questions of the location of drop off and all of that as you refine the project and as we move on with the public benefit. So that work is ongoing, I guess.
Yes, yes.
You heard my question? Yes. I will.
That was rhetorical.
Yes.
Yeah, rhetorical.
Yes, I should have gone down. I will self-mute and throw it to Adam for the leads.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So for public trust, which is where we are, there's a number of things we're supposed to evaluate at this phase. So I'll just list those out, and then do you want to do just the same order? So we'll start on the screen and okay. So circulation and access is something that the team presented and that we should be looking at. Utilities, so thanks for flagging that, Pooja. Free speech and public assembly, I think we had some questions on that. Open space, light and air, views, and land use, urban form, and compatibility of land use and with existing planning policies. So I think we're going to start on the screen again. So back to you, Elizabeth.
Sorry, I was guessing you were going to go backwards. Wrong. I really appreciate the work you've done. Also, the attention to edges as well as the diagonal in the interior of the space. I hope that all the seating that you're engaging with leans towards sociability, that how seats interact with, permanent seating interacts with each other. And I hope it's all open to the public. If it's out there, I hope it's available to the public. I also am glad you're thinking about spending more time in the space. I think the examples of members of the public might be expanded once the weather gets better and you can see maybe some skaters. I'm not sure whether or not skaters are welcome in the space, and just think about how some of the people whom you encounter might also be available, have that space available to them and open to them. And I also I'm glad that you're still thinking through the arcade space, and encourage you to look at, keep the public in mind in all those decisions going forward, since you are looking to really strongly benefit the public with this project. and Pooja. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So the reason I was asking about the stormwater requirements is because the public benefit conversation often revolves around public spaces, which is great. But this particular location in the city all drains to a combined sewer, and the storm drainage requirements are different because of that. The biggest benefit that can possibly be made in a situation like this is to actually pull the stormwater out of that system and instead discharge to a dedicated storm drain. The reason is that the storm drainage doesn't go to the treatment plant, which is currently overloaded, and when it gets overloaded, it overflows into the Sound. So that was one of the reasons that is the reason I was asking about that. So when you're looking into whether or not that is a requirement, you might keep that in mind, because it would be a huge public benefit if you were able to separate the storm out of that system.
Thanks,
That is
Pooja.
all that I had.
Shall we go the other way around the room, start with
Yeah.
Matt? Just to live it up.
Okay, sure. I appreciate the development of this design since we last met. I think there was some good ideas, but I see quite a bit of development. I think a couple things that stand out that I just appreciate are, I really like the location of the bike room and the fitness center. Very often in projects, mixed-use projects, those things are in the basement or in the part of the building that we can't think of anything else to do with. And so they're dark, and I think this is really enlivens it, and I think it will enhance the experience of everyone to see people coming and going. And if it's a little messy or a little dirty, I think that'll be okay because the benefit is strong. I said last time, I really do like the combined vehicle entrance. I do think that, I think you've made the strong case that, the current alley is really delivery vehicle dominant, and aggregating all that in one spot away from Thomas, I think is a really good thing. In terms of the development, I appreciate the focus on the difference between the north and the south plazas or courtyards, how they have a different character based on solar access and activity. And I also feel like the design, maybe it's of this hardscape has evolved, it's a little bit calmer. I think last time maybe it was a little over gestural, at least in my subjective opinion, and now it seems to be more consistent, allowing the planting or the to be more figural. So I think that's really strong. And then lastly, it seems like there's been a really strong focus on the pedestrian experience on Taylor and 6 compared to last time. So I appreciate all those things, and I think this is great development, and keep going. That's it.
All right, so thank you again. It was a great presentation, and I appreciate how much it was answering the questions that we had brought forth in our last conversation, and seeing the continued development and thinking about the differences between each of the spaces was helpful. It was also helpful to understand some of the ways that that's functioning as a public and private gradient as you do move through the site. I also really appreciate a lot of the development along the right-of-ways. And so with those in mind, I would consider, which it sounds like you're already doing with the mention at the beginning of Thomas Street Reimagined and how this is connected to the surrounding areas. So I would just encourage you to continue to think about how your site is reaching out to the surrounding areas with the same level of emphasis that you very clearly put into the experiential level of people within the site, whether they're the private users of the site or people moving around or through the space. And yeah, I'll absolutely second what Pooja shared about stormwater management, and there's a real strength in some of the expansion of the vegetative areas along the right of way, and if that can then go into an actual stormwater management system rather than a combined system, I think that would be a public benefit. Yeah, thank you. I'll pass it along.
Yes, thank you for the evolution of all of this. It's really good. I think that Jack probably said at the very beginning what I would sum up right now, which is that you've done a great job and we still need to look for public benefit offsite. I think Pooja's thrown one idea out there, you guys have volunteered some others. I think I might have been the person who brought up the First Amendment issues the last time. And honestly, if there's a contribution off-site for public benefit, I think that issue of the taking a public alley and making a private area out of it gets a little more balanced as well. And as the design has evolved, it's a private area. So I think if we can keep that that off-site public aspect of it, then I think it's easier to kind of understand how that privatization fits in. That's really all I.
Joe, I'll pass and go last.
I always said great project. One of the things that I recognize about some of these plazas, and you've done a great job landscaping them as open spaces, but without people in them, they kind of are not, they just kind of walk by them, and even if they have benches, like even today, you're not really sitting outside a lot. So be really curious. I mean, I know the DSA at Occidental Park, they have concerts in the front, so I would just encourage you to, as you're going forward, like, what are people going to do there? That just kind of sit on a sunny day. I can imagine what they're doing, but on a typical day.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Well, I concur with much of what's been said, so I'll probably spin it a different way and I'll decide to talk about planting a little bit. I think that's actually quite exciting, the differentiation that you're showing with planting, and obviously we have different exposures, but I think in looking at this whole site, I think the awesome thing is that you have 4 street frontages plus an interior, and so I think there's really exciting things that you continue to explore with the differentiation of the rights of way, how you grow across the street to Thomas. You did mention in the beginning that SCL has money allotted to that, but just thinking about how that kind of space grows, going back to what Molly said, expanding the bounds of the site there. But then also taking advantage of the cues of planting to kind of articulate that diagonal move through the site. I think, even though it's not going to be right in the center, how you're using that as part of that articulation. So looking forward to seeing one.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo what others said, that this was an incredible presentation. You guys have done a beautiful job. I guess would be more points of encouragement is that, there's always been a lot of interest across downtown about further activating our alleyways and drawing people in. And as you demonstrated, many of those alleyways are pretty deplorable when it comes to the public experience. And this would be a great segue from that. I am still just slightly concerned about what Ben brought up about that truncation in the center of this site and really making it feel like people can pass through and that they're not going to hit a block. And so, because I do think it's beautiful to have these 2 disparate spaces. I think your greatest design challenge will be making people feel like they can flow from one to the other in like a safe and sort of understandable manner. I think, like you mentioned, lighting is going to be absolutely critical. Maybe wayfinding, as mentioned, to sort of pull people through. But if there are even small sort of interesting opportunities for visibility of one side of that corridor to the other, so you can always kind of see that this is an actual through passageway. Because I think otherwise you're not going to get that flow of anybody who isn't familiar with the interior usage of that space. So if there are ways to create a visual connection across that 60 feet of compression, I think that'll be very helpful.
Just quickly, really appreciated all the graphics and work on all the edge treatments, on the streetscape treatments. I think those are looking really good. My main concern is what Jack mentioned at the very beginning, is discussions with SDOT, ongoing discussions with SDOT about Thomas Street, tagging on to Jill's comment about potential offsite public benefit. It's such an important street for really this part of the city, and just really encourage more discussion and thinking about that. Love to see that. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you again to the team. We'd really like to thank you for your presentation and for the work that you've done in development. Overall, the commission appreciates frankly a lot. We really appreciate the development, evolution, and design, the location of the program spaces. We really appreciate you sharing with us who uses the spaces and how, and feel that there's been a big improvement in visibility in and out of both the alley spaces and the buildings. The additional activation of the plaza spaces was noted. Attention to edges and detail, the incorporation of seating and the sociability aspects of the project. We appreciate you going out and spending more time in the space and looking at who's out there. I heard a lot of feedback on the combined vehicle entrance and what that allows for Thomas especially, but other streets around. Differentiating the north and south plazas and courtyards. The strong focus on pedestrian experience, not just for Thomas and John, but also for Taylor and Sixth, the team noted a couple of times. The expansion and differentiation of the vegetated areas. And we also really saw positive changes in the transparency and visibility, the vegetation, the calmer hardscape, and the openings and the building access. So we really appreciate you showing building access on Taylor and Sixth. And so moving into the action, the Seattle Design Commission approves the public trust analysis for the 200 Taylor. 200 John. 200 Taylor. I didn't hear any conditions, but with the following recommendations. We wanted to see a little bit more programming of that southeast corner and making sure it's active for residents in the area and the public, and keep the public in mind for that space, for that arcade space. I heard a suggestion to expand who's included in the public, so making sure skaters, etc., are thought of for who's going to use it. I know as a building owner that might be my first thought, but we'd like to see a little bit more exploration of your utility infrastructure, specifically Pooja referenced. If you're able to separate out your stormwater into its own system and divert it from the existing main. Encourage you to integrate with surrounding areas, continuing to look at the programming of the public spaces, and then making sure that there's even more kind of visibility through your main diagonal. So really making sure that people can connect through that space and across that space, that it looks open, feels safe. And then I heard a couple comments on continuing to explore public benefits off of the site. So Jill mentioned a couple. One was around kind of First Amendment or speech, as well as those connections, those kind of transportation connections, specifically the crossing of 7th and John. So
the only thing I would add is continue to, we'll look at SDCI and how you respond to the issue, minimizing to the extent possible, minimum width for the curb cut width, minimum height for that. And then whatever's going on in the inside, that it's not treated like back of the house, that you do something that, so you're looking at that floor plate, it's just not concrete, and that you can, to bring some design finesse into that part.
And for those extensions off of the site to also be considering the extension of those streetscape improvements beyond the site.
Great, thank you. So with that, I think we can move to, how do we do this? Same order, reverse order?
Sure.
So with Matt, we'll go.
Do you have to make a motion? No.
Yeah, you make a motion to approve.
Yeah, okay, I do.
Okay. So then your vote, and then you would vote.
So you can make the motion and vote at the same time.
I thought that's what I did. I vote to approve. Thank you.
Volunteer.
Approve.
Adam approve.
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 And then for our friends online, Pooja.
Approve.
And
Approve.
great. Excellent. Thank you. Well done. And we will be looking, we'll probably be talking offline about when it's appropriate to come for public benefit based on what we've heard.